Okay, so this is going to be, switch to the slides real quick. Gonna be our June meeting. My name is Teo Lachev, and I want to thank all the people that actually help around our group. Kind of give them credit. It takes a village to run a group, and I appreciate all of them. You know, Damu, John, Mike Tabladillo, who's actually paying for our beautiful meetup site, which is our main website right now. Eric and Neil Water Street, all these people that actually help me. So, do we have anybody who is a newcomer? Any new people to our to our group? Any new members? First timers? Yes.
First timers, Addy from Endpoint.
Hey, Addy. Thanks for joining.
Hi.
Okay.
Hi, first timers, Justika from Atlanta.
Justika from Atlanta. Okay. Thanks for coming, Justika, joining us. Do we have anybody else?
Hi,
Yeah.
and this is Garin from Endpoint, along with Addy.
That's right. Thank you, Garen. Thanks for coming. And you are from Dallas, right?
No, from San Francisco.
San Francisco. There we go. Sorry. Well, anybody further apart than San Francisco? Other countries, internationals? Sometimes we had people, the last time actually was from far away. I don't remember, Europe or something. I guess not. Cool. Well, let's then jump to, so as usual, those of you who are new, just to kind of set up the agenda, right? So typically what I do, I go through a few housekeeping things, the latest on Power BI, you know, what events are coming up. If you're looking for kind of a guided training or Microsoft, you know, conferences. So first thing, our main website is Meetup. You know, we lost the SQL Pass website because SQL Pass shut down operations a long time ago. So here is the link. And this is where you would register, and this is where you will get the notifications. We don't have any other websites. Microsoft is alluding that they might actually have a Power BI community site, but I haven't heard anything substantial at this point. So we'll see. Maybe at some point we're going to open a second one. Meetup is going to be our main one. If you like what you get some business value from these meetings, please spread the word. One thing, you know, since we became virtual, we started recording our meetings, and I put them on YouTube. So if you wanna get the recording for this session or prior sessions, go to https://bit.ly Atlanta BI Rex, and this is where you will find the recordings. If you want to get more involved, always looking for speakers. If you've got something interesting on Power BI to share, please let me know. Jobs. Does anybody have any opportunities for, you know, Microsoft BI developers? Anybody looking for BI talent? Don't be shy. Well, I guess we don't have. That's very unusual. Usually we have like 2 or 3 you know, openings, but maybe now we don't. Well, if you do, you want to tell us about that, use the chat window, put the link in there. Hopefully you'll get some traction. Great. So on the event side of things, I haven't heard anything exciting happening in near future. And if you guys, you know, heard about something coming up, please let us know. But I want to bring your attention to something that actually already happened. Microsoft built last week And that event is a developer-oriented event, right? So there was a sessions about Power BI embedded, what's new in that. So it's a little bit more developer focused, but there was one good session about Power BI for BI pros and data engineers, which I recommend. I really enjoyed that session because it tells you what's actually coming up with demos on some of the new features like automatic Power BI aggregations and things like this. So go to mybuild.microsoft.com, search for Power BI. All the sessions are complimentary there. And I hope you will find something interesting, something exciting, actually. Any other events? Anybody who knows about something happening? I don't know what happened with SQL Saturdays. I think Redgate is now managing those, but the last time I checked, there wasn't anything coming in Atlanta. Does anybody know about any interesting events coming up? Is Damu here? No, he's not. He's usually the one that has something, always has something. Well, I guess that's it. See what else we've got. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk briefly about is some of the latest in Power BI and outside Power BI, some latest features that caught my attention since the last time we met, which was on May 5th. So we have an interesting feature. I'm going to show you a demo, kind of brief demo later on, for goals, so there is a lot of interest as a BI professionals for us to create things like scorecard, key performance indicators to track actual versus budget. So what Microsoft wants to do is to kind of democratize this, because previously you have to put that in the model. That requires modeling experience. Maybe you create KPIs. But now they kind of want to make that easier, even for business users to do it. So we're going to take a look at that in a moment. I'll show you a very quick demo about how to create a scorecard from a business standpoint. Then apparently a lot of people have data in SharePoint lists, SharePoint online lists. So now we have the option to quickly create reports. So I cannot show you that feature. I haven't planned a demo, but essentially if you go to SharePoint Online, if you go to the list, now there should be an option to actually create reports right in SharePoint. So that will make it very easy to actually create a report which is connected to the SharePoint list. Actually, connecting to SharePoint list is very easy. What people struggle with is the URL, how to get to that list. And what they do, they go to SharePoint, they copy the URL from the browser, they get to reporting services, connect to SharePoint, plug that URL, and things just don't work. And the reason why they don't work is because they're pointing to an ASPX page. A SharePoint, when you go, every page is ASP.NET page. So what you have to do is kind of backtrack a little bit and go to the site and go to the actual list. That, however, requires some consulting expertise. So hopefully now actually we'll make that much straightforward. We have a modern visual tooltips, not a big thing there, but just wanted to show. So for example, let's say we have here this chart. We hover on top of the chart instead of black and white tooltips that you are probably used to seeing since they were the default in Power BI. Now we've got a little bit better looking tooltips. And what's actually more interesting is that if the chart supports drill through or drill down, now you have actually these options in here. So that's another way for you to initiate drill through or drill down besides the toolbar, the icons here, or right clicking and going to drill down. Apparently people struggle with this icon. They don't know about right clicking. So hopefully now with the tooltip, we're going to make this a little bit more intuitive for them to do those things. All right, so let me show you a little bit before we continue to, actually, let me go through the rest of it.
Double click still do that, Teo?
So double click, I don't think double click ever worked. You have to actually enable, let's say if I want to drill down to enable this drill down, and then single click will do it. I don't think double click ever worked. Did it work for you, Stacy? Yeah, double clicking just, doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I was probably mistaken.
Yeah. Quickly going through the rest of the slides. So this meeting is going to be on Azure Purview. Stacy Jones is going to do it. Next one is going to be on July 5th. So an MVP, kind of consultant called Ray Heavens, who actually has done quite a bit of very nice community work. He actually has an application published in Power BI if you want to analyze Google Analytics. But he's going to actually do a kind of a UI-oriented presentation, how to use bookmarks and buttons basically to the fullest in Power BI. So that's going to be July 5th. And that's all I had to cover except that little demo for Power BI goals that I'm going to show you. And then we're going to move to the main portion of the presentation. So what is the scenario here? What these goals mean for you? Let me see. Okay. There we go. So I want to create scorecard. Let's say I'm a business user at Prologica, right? And we've got lots of sales, but I want to track how I'm doing against the budget, the target, right? So you may heard the term scorecard, which is actually think of it like, important goals or KPIs you want to track. You put them together on scorecard. Maybe you even heard the term balanced scorecard, which actually represents scorecard from all subject areas coming together in one place. And you can do those things in Power BI without actually this new feature. But that will require you kind of modeling experience. You got to define the actual, you got to put the goal, measures, and all that. So this is still possible. And if you want to have more control over the dashboard, the scorecard appearance, that's still a valid way to go. That's probably what I would do if I want to have more control about the visualization, right? So yeah, somebody here says on the chat window that double clicking works in pivot tables in Excel, but not, I guess, in Power BI. So the idea of this scorecarding Power BI goals is that to allow business users, people with no experience, who have access to reports where these metrics will come from, to kind of assemble scorecard. They may look like this. So we have here on rows, we have different KPIs. We have a status, we have a value, and we have the actuals probably, and this is the target. And we may also have a spark line that tells us what happened with the actual value over time. And then we have some other features, right? So before I continue any further, I just want to mention that this is a premium feature. So that's another incentive for you probably to consider, if you like that feature, to actually consider Power BI Premium. It's not available in Power BI Pro, so you need either Premium per user or Premium licensing. If you do that, you will see here a menu on the left side. Just give me a second, see if I can make my cursor traceable so you guys don't imagine what I'm doing here. Okay. I'm gonna go back here. There we go. So these goals in the left navigation bar, will only appear if you're on Power BI Premium, as well as the other premium features like deployment pipeline, for instance. So how can we use that feature to excite our managers that actually we design a scorecard? Well, it's very easy. So we will, by the way, it supports two types of KPIs. The first one is static. Static means that I manually update the actual and the value. So for example, although you cannot tell from the appearance, this first one here, it's something that I kind of hard-coded, the actual and the value. How is that cool? Well, some KPIs actually, they're not data-driven. Maybe you don't have data behind them. Maybe employee churn over, maybe they don't have a data set for it, or customer churn. So you can go there and just plug in the actual and the target, and you update it by yourself. But what makes obviously things more exciting is data-driven goals, like this second one. So let's go and actually create a scorecard real quick and see how that works. I'm gonna go to that premium workspace. Again, notice here that we have a diamond icon next to the workspace. So that's a premium workspace, right? All right, so we go here and we say new scorecard, right? So we're gonna create a new scorecard. We're gonna give it a name. Let's call this Atlanta BI scorecard. Okay, create. Scorecard is done. Nothing exciting happening because we have to actually create a goal. So I'm gonna click this button in here. And the first goal that I'm gonna create, it's a static goal. So let's call it revenue. Let's say I don't have a data behind our revenue. So what I can do, I can say I want my actual value, my current value is maybe, let's say 3 million, but I want this to become, actually to be 3.5 million, right? And here, obviously I can do formatting, options here, just like for measures. I can say the status is at risk. I'm behind target, right? And I can go ahead and actually save that goal. And there we go. Now we have a static goal. If I want to change it later on, I can go in here, just change these numbers, and that's it. Okay, so the next one I'm going to create is actually dynamic goal. So for that, let's say I want to track my gross margin. For this, I have some reports that I can get these two measures, the current and the target. Now, the interesting thing here, and something that got me by surprise, I would expect actually when I go and specify data-driven values for current and target, to select measures, something that is in the model. But Microsoft actually had this design pattern where actually they don't use measures, they ask you to use reports. So what does that mean? It means that somebody, before I create this goal, must have put some kind of a Power BI report or reports that actually have actual and budget visualizations. And if that's the case, then I can go here and instead of entering the current value, I can go and say, I want to connect to data. But data doesn't mean the data set, it means the report. So for example, I can go here, let's say this retail analysis sample is my report that has actual and target measures, and they could be different reports, doesn't have to be the same. So I can go here and I can say, okay, this year sales is I can use that for my actual, essentially the blue. So I go here and click on a data point in this chart, and I'm gonna take the latest data point in here. So I'm gonna click it, and then we have this nice dialog that pops up. So this is a goals, part of setting up the goal that says this is what's gonna happen. You selected this value, and the latest value is that much. And because the visual uses date field on the x-axis, Power BI discovers this and it gives me an option to track this value in time series. This actually is going to generate that spark line that you saw before. As you can see, this is a very easy experience. Go and select, click on the visual that has the actual, and then go and click connect. And that's going to actually create the current value. And we're going to use the same approach. Again, this could be a different report, but I'm going to use the same. So this time I'm going to select the black line, which is the last year sales, and then I'm going to click connect again. Okay, so we have the current, we have the target, and one thing that I don't like about goals is that currently the status cannot be data driven. So if you're coming from an analysis service background, you know that you can create a measure with values 1, 0, and -1 that gives you what's the status is. But currently you cannot do that. So you have to go and manually say, oh, I'm actually on track or whatever. So I'm gonna go ahead and save it. And there we go. So now we've got a dynamic measure. So what that dynamic measure means, if the data, when the data set is refreshed, Power BI is automatically going to update that measure. Not only this, but once you create your dashboard, if you look at the data set behind it, I'm sorry, if you look at the workspace where the scorecard is created, you will see two artifacts created. One of them is the scorecard itself, and the other one is the data set. So what's happening with this data set is that every time the data set is refreshed, the underlying data sets of the source reports are refreshed. Power BI gets a snapshot of the goals associated with this data sets. So it takes a snapshot of the current value. It takes a snapshot of the target value. So actually you can trace this over time. Not only this, but you can create your own reports from that data set. That's kind of a nice, interesting implementation detail, right? So also we have this concept of, oh, by the way, if I, from the dashboard, because this is a dynamic measure, the second one that we created, similar to dashboards in Power BI, I can click on this report icon, and that's going to bring me to the underlying report where that measure came with the visual highlighted where that measure came from. The visual kind of brought in the spotlight. So presumably I can see more details behind that value. And another thing that I can do is that I could periodically do check-ins. So for instance, I can go and say, for this dynamic measure that I created, I can click on it and I can say that I'm going to basically update, for example, the status. So I'm going to say on this date, maybe I can change the date. I can include a note and I can say the status now is behind. So periodically, the idea here as a business user is to monitor these goals, monitor the scorecards, and make changes, like for example, on the status of the gross margin goal that I just did. So this is a brief introduction to goals. Any questions? Question about goals or anything, Power BI? Okay. Guess not. If you have any, put them in the chat window. And let's go and switch to the main presentation. Stacy, I would like to invite you to take over or give us a great presentation on Azure Purview.
Excellent. Thank you, Teo. And I hope to do just that. But we'll, I'm following a big act here, so bear with me. Thanks everybody for having me today, and I just wanted to talk to you about Azure Purview, as this is a new product coming out from Microsoft in our cloud, and it is still in preview, so some things are going to be broken for the time being, so you're probably going to run into a rough patch here and there until we go into general availability. But right now it's available for you to go out and play around with and kick the tires on. So it's a good time to take a look at it. And we're going to just have a short presentation. I like to give a big bird's eye view of the products before I dive into demos, but we're going to do both. And I just wanted to, open it up and, we'll go through this deck and talk a little bit about what Purview is. So if you look at your data as your most strategic asset, 90% of corporate strategies will cite information as a critical enterprise asset by 2022. So 175 zettabytes are expected global volume of data generated annually by 2025. So that's an IDC quote, the first one from Gartner. And if you look at data governance, it's becoming increasingly interdisciplinary. So by that we mean the chief data officer is all about discovering assets, trying to figure out what do I have, where did the data originate, can I trust it, can I make business decisions on it, and how valuable is it? Do I have a lot of raw data that I'm unable to monetize? And those kinds of things, or am I out of compliance? So along the right there, what's my exposure to risk? Is my usage compliant? How do I control access and use? So what is required by Regulation X? So we've all heard about GDPR and SOX compliance and all the different regulatory requirements coming out of California. So there are increasingly all of these compliance demands being placed on IT organizations. And so this is where we really started to see the rise of the chief data officer in organizations. And, the chief data officer really is the person who's going to lose a lot of sleep if that laptop gets lost in the airport with a lot of data in it. So, or if they're trying to prevent themselves from being the next company in the news. And we know that that's becoming more and more likely. Everybody's going down that path nowadays, unfortunately. But you want to make every effort to avoid it. And I don't know if you're following the news, but we've seen some of the leading banks in the country, or indeed in the world, have just been levied some huge fines for being out of compliance. So it's not a exclusively a small company problem. This is a big company problem too, and maybe arguably even worse there, right? So elements of successful data governance, though, are managing the growing data landscape. Are you able to do that, right? Are you able to overcome your operational silos? Increase data agility. And by that, I mean, are you able to get the data to the right people for the right purpose at the right time? So it's a synergy of information, delivered in a timely fashion. And it's, as I mentioned previously, complying with those industry regulations. So understanding all of that's imperative in this day and age. And so we reimagined data governance with Azure Purview. Parts of this are very new. Parts of this are an outgrowth of our prior offering called Azure Data Catalog. And we still use that terminology, but we have coined a new phrase for the entire process and broadened the scope of it. So it's unified, it's hybrid, and it's open. And it's all based in Azure. So Azure Purview enables unified data governance. So we reimagine data governance in the cloud. We set the foundation for effective data governance. We maximize the business value of data for data consumers, and then we've gained strategic insight into data use across the estate. So reimagining data governance in the cloud means managing and governing operational, transactional, and analytical data. So that's all very, very different types of data. Operational data is all about what's happening currently in your system. Transactional data is down to the very most granular details, but analytic data is looking at the big picture. Where are my trends and what are my outliers, right? So it's descriptive analytics, it's predictive analytics, and it's prescriptive analytics. We have cloud native purpose-built service to address discovery and compliance needs. So instead of you managing and maintaining your own infrastructure to actually try to harness all that chaos yourself, we allow you to utilize the strength of the cloud to actually govern your entire data estate. It's fully managed, serverless. It's a PaaS offering, platform as a service. So by that we mean you're going to have a little minimal obligation in terms of configuring it and setting it up. It's not quite completely automated, but you're going to see some of the breadth of what that might entail today. Right? So eliminating manual, ad hoc, and homegrown solutions. This is what it's all about. Bringing it to the cloud so that we can do all of that for you, and you can focus on your business. Establishing the foundation for effective data governance. So we're going to automate discovery of data in on-premises, multi-cloud, and SaaS-based offerings. So not just Microsoft offerings. So all of your data estate. Classifying data at scale to specify sensitivity. So is it private? Is it sensitive? Is it public? All of these types of things. And then the compliance level, the industry, the business, and company-specific value. All of those different things that lend credence to your data and give context to your data are something we're going to allow you to actually actively manage and work with moving forward. So know where data came from and what was derived from it with data lineage. So very, very important, when you're trying to discover what is your single golden source of the truth, where is the good data, where is the bad data, and where does it ultimately come from? Because in an ideal world, you'd single source everything, but the reality is that data is everywhere and it has been copied everywhere. For too long, organizations didn't have all their data in a single place. It would have been lovely if everybody had a data warehouse where all your data was centrally located, but that's just not reality, because companies can get 80% of the way there and they can buy, several other companies and they're starting back at square one again. So just wanted to, point that out that you're trying to hit a moving target for a lot of these things, and we're here to help you with that. So, and understand that lineage of your data and where it came from, and understand what's fit for purpose and what's not. So, maximizing the business value of your data, that's connecting business and technical data analysts, data scientists, and data engineers to a trusted data catalog. Part of that real intrinsic value of having that big monolithic enterprise data warehouse was that everyone had single one-stop shopping for data. And now that's even more important than ever, because we've got the emergence of data scientists and data engineers. This heralds a new age in information management. So we're now it becomes more and more important that people have readily access to data that they need. So enabling these users to quickly find data and view its lineage and sensitivity. Just because it's dirty doesn't mean it's not valuable. So, some of that context really lends to the purpose at hand. Delivering a curated and consistent glossary of business terms and definitions. Very, very important that people speak the same language for very, very obvious reasons, right? Because when you're using the same term for different definitions, it can be a really chaotic conversation, and that can really make it difficult to make your numbers match and run your business. So gaining insight into data use across the state. So understanding at a glance how data is being created and used across your data estate. Visually assessing the state of data assets, scans, business glossary, and sensitive data. All that stuff in a single glance at your data. So here's just a quick blurb. I'm not going to go through this. It's just a quick statement from someone at Heathrow who was actually an early adopter of Purview, and they're really impressed of the direction of the product and how it addresses the governance needs of their ambitious data estate, data discovery, and so forth. So we anticipate to see more and more of this as we see adoption increase, approaching general availability. So Azure Purview, United Data Governance, if you want to look at it from a bird's eye view here, we have data insights on top of a data catalog, if you will. And then that catalog can span your on-premise, your multi-cloud data, and that data map actually spans those software as a service offerings as well. So other things like Salesforce and other SaaS offerings out there in the industry all play into that centralized data map that's put together. Right? And so, the data map, automating and managing metadata at scale, the data catalog, the data insights, these are just introductions to some terms and some that we're going to be using with Purview as we move forward. So unify and make data meaningful using Purview data map, right? So automated metadata scanning and lineage identification of hybrid data stores, 100 plus built-in and custom classifiers, and then Microsoft information protection sensitivity labels. So the premise is you're going to scan data in, we're going to apply these classifiers to it, and we have a lot of these classifiers out of the box, but we also give you the ability to create your own custom classifiers. So if you have specific data points that you might want to recognize and you might want to be able to identify regardless of where they are in your organization, you can define your own data types. And I came from a long career at UPS, and we had the one magic number that I think everybody's seen in their lifetime, and that's the package shipping number, the 1Z number, so to speak. That would be an example of a piece of information that you may want to build some rules around in your Purview system to actually spot those numbers, actually identify them so that people can readily utilize those, because that was like the magic number that enabled you to look up a package in just about any system around UPS. So very important to have that. And so looks like we have a question over here. Does the data have to exist in the Azure cloud, or can it exist in other Microsoft products such as Microsoft's version CIFS and EMC, OneDrive, SharePoint, Microsoft SQL Server? The largest source of data at my organization cannot be moved to the cloud for legal reasons. That's an interesting question with regard to the OneDrive and SharePoint. We'll look at the list when I'm going to show you the list of sources. I know that you can do SQL Server. There are other products like Oracle. I'm not sure. I'll have to check the list and see if EMC is there yet. But OneDrive and SharePoint are there for sure. So we'll get around. Hopefully, if I miss your question, please call me out on it again, Michael. So let's. So when you're thinking about this system, think about that ability to actually scan those and apply those classification rules that I just mentioned. Enabling effortless discovery with Purview data catalog. So once this data is collected and has been classified in a catalog, now you want to be able to search it and browse it, tag it with business glossary and workflows, and then look at the lineage and sources and examine all these things, right? So another question, does Purview has Oracle EBS connection? Does it work with unstructured data? It does work with unstructured data, but Oracle EBS, I do not believe that's on the list. And again, RV will look at that list in a moment when I go through the demo. I don't have it quite memorized yet, but I don't think I saw that EBS connection in there, but we'll look. So get a bird's eye view of sensitive data with data insights, reports on assets, scans, glossary, classification, and labeling. So we're going to be able to see all that in a moment. We're just about done with this deck. So make the most of your Microsoft investments, Azure Power Platform. You're going to be able to connect it up to your Power Platform, operational analytical data, Microsoft 365, SQL Server, and multi-cloud, hybrid, and SaaS. Right. Now, before we get right, this probably, I think this is the last slide before the demo, but I just wanted to talk about the concepts that you're going to get to. For me, it's very important that I kind of frame these things up at a bird's eye view. We're going to look at the Purview Studio, which is going to be a stewardship portal. So if you're a developer, you can think of it as a Visual Studio, if you will, but I like to think of it as a stewardship portal because it's not just for developers by any stretch, right? This is for business people to be using, and information stewards, as I refer to them, right? So the people who understand the meaning of the data and can curate the data so that they may enrich the data with, glossary terms, categorizations, all of that stuff. These are the people who would know what to do with that. A person like me looking at data is just going to understand, where there's a foreign key and where a relationship is. But when I look at a particular piece code or something, I'm not likely to understand what its business meaning is, right? So that's where your people who actually work in the business and understand the business that you're working in actually do. So they're going to use Purview Studio to manage everything, and this is all on the web browser base. So you're going to be able to you're going to see it in just a moment. But we're going to build a catalog, which is a searchable repository of assets and resource sets. So an asset is a single object of a specific type. So that type could be a table or file or a Power BI report or an Azure Data Factory pipeline, etc. And several other types of things that we're going to evolve to. So I would imagine we're going to add more and more things as we evolve in this product. All right, as you start to see more data sources added over time, and I would expect to see just a giant explosion of those right after GA. But it has a schema, so that's a structure. So if you're talking about a table, that's the columns in the table. If you're talking about a file, it's also the columns in the file. But if you were looking at a Power BI report, there would be much more, less rigid structured data within it, right? A resource set, however, is a logical container for multiple physical objects with the same structure. And I'm going to give you an example. We're going to look at this in the demos in just a moment. But that's where you may have that folder out on your data lake that has a bunch of files in it, and all those files may have each file may be for a specific day, but they all have the exact same structure, right? So the idea is that you're maybe using a Spark-based system to generate an incremental batch of data every day, but you're storing it one day at a time in one text file, and that text file could be CSV, tab delimited, Parquet, you name it. Lots of different things there, right? Lineage is, of course, how did I get to the data set that I have at hand? Did I join data from an Oracle database and a text file, or and then did I run it through an ETL tool and produce the data set that I'm looking at, or where did it come from, right? And how can I go back and trace through that and look at that, right? Then we have the idea of the classifications, right? Classifying the data as sensitive, non-sensitive, financial data, and so forth, right? So lots of different things. You get ways to classify your data. And then finally, a glossary, right? So a glossary of business terms, that you're going to apply to your data set. You can organize those into sets called term sets. And so we're going to look at all of this in just a moment. But any questions on the kind of the concepts, the overarching concepts that we have here before we dig in?
Nothing in the chat window. I think you got the last one, Stacy. So
Okay.
I guess everybody's looking forward to the demo.
Yeah. So we have the Purview features here. I'm not going to go through these. You'll by the way, you'll get this deck. I'll give this to Teo, and let's go ahead and dig in then. Right. So here I am in the Azure portal, and if you're wondering where do I start, if you have access to your company portal, or if you have a trial subscription, you can do this today. And you can see I can just search for Purview out here, and there's Purview accounts. So you can see that I have created one with my glorious name upon it. and just prefixed it with PV for Purview. But if you don't have one, you're going to click through the hit the create button up here. And it's very similar to all the other types of things you do in the Azure portal. So you'll pick your subscription, I have access to a personal subscription. I also have some access to some Microsoft subscriptions. You can pick an existing resource group, and a resource group is just a container, if you will. I like to think of it as a folder to logically group a set of Azure resources so that I can either, when I'm done with all of those, I can throw them away by deleting the entire folder rather than having to go out and individually delete each single one, right? So that's a logical grouping, and the ones with the stars here are required here. So you'll put this in, you'll give it an arbitrary account name. That's where I gave mine PV Stacy. And then you'll pick an Azure region to deploy this in. So the Azure region in North America, you're going to pick one of the ones in one of the United States regions here. So like East US, East US 2. South Central U.S. and so forth. So one of those ideally closer to you geographically, right? And then on the next blade, you can pick, about, whether you have a public network, whether you have private endpoint access, and there's some additional configuration things here where capacity units kind of specify how efficient your scans are going to happen. And you're going to do scans on a recurring basis, and we're going to get into scans in just a minute. But here, this just kind of influences how much capacity or how quickly those scans will occur, and you'll be billed accordingly. I do not believe we're billing anybody while it's in preview. So other than having a Azure account, I doubt you'll get charged on any of this today. So once you're satisfied, you hit review and create. It's going to create a studio for you. And let's go back and look at those preview accounts. So here is my Purview accounts. And so here's my Purview account, and you can see it's in my resource group and my subscription. I'll have access to this through the studio, and so I'll be able to actually go in here and click this button that says Open Purview Studio, which I've already done. I can also grant users access to Open Purview Studio. So if I want multiple people to be in here working together, they can do so. So it looks like somebody dropped in, James, 34 cents per capacity unit throughput. It looks like 4 capacity units for free until May 31st. Thank you, James. Yeah, so it looks like you get that first radio button for free until May 31st. So it looks like actually we've gone beyond that. So it looks like you probably will be charged now. So interesting. So we have not gone GA, so I wonder if they're going to extend that. But in any case, a trial subscription and some modest testing, I doubt you're going to ring up any kind of charge over your nominal allotment there for your free credits. So here is the Purview account. So once I click on the Purview Studio, Open Purview Studio, it's going to take me into the Purview Studio, which we'll look at here in a moment. What I'm going to show you in a moment is just what I built by going through this tutorial, right? So if you look at this tutorial, we've got a bunch of quick starts out here on the Azure Purview documentation. So that's going to take you through a 5-step process of doing all this. And I'm going to take you through the second through the fifth. The first one's a little bit lengthy. So in this first step, after you've created your Purview account, you're going to actually run through this process. It is going to actually have you download a starter kit. So here's, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong place here. Let me go back. Okay, here we go. So here's the tutorial I meant to go through. So in the first step, it's going to have you scan the data. And, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to sign in to Azure and you're going to download the starter kit. So this is going to give you a zip file. and this zip file is going to have some scripts in it, some Azure scripts that you're going to be able to execute from PowerShell. You'll need to run those as an administrator here and in the second step, and then you're going to see a set of commands that you're going to have to actually execute. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to build an Azure Blob Storage account inside a resource group that you give it. It's going to build an Azure Data Factory, a very simple Azure Data Factory pipeline to transform the data coming from the Blob Storage account and putting it into Azure Data Lake Store Gen 2. Now, Azure Data Lake Store Gen 2 is also very, very similar to Blob Storage. And in fact, it's a kind of Blob Storage. The big difference is it's hierarchical, just like your folders on your hard drive. You have the ability to create folders and organize your data. It also has some other things that are very, very beneficial to data science and to working with your data. So it's a very popular pattern here to pull in data from a variety of sources and store it in your data lake so that you can consume it. And by the way, most of our Azure products are designed to connect to our Azure Data Lake Store and work with the data there. So it's very, very popular pattern. But here in the third step and the fourth step, you're going to run some PowerShell commands, and it's going to do exactly what I just described. So it's going to require you to look up some information, your tenant ID, your subscription ID, and your portal, and your catalog name, and a catalog resource group name. And so once it goes through all that, lastly, there's some, you're going to have to log into your Azure Purview account and grant a few permissions. That's what's going to happen here. And then you're going to run these scripts that you created, right? So you're going to go into PowerShell and run all these scripts that these PowerShell commands like this one and another one, namely these two PowerShell commands. And once those are finished up, they will take about 10, 15 minutes, maybe even a little longer than that, probably 15 to 20 minutes to run. So that's why I have done that here before we started today. And especially this scanning the data catalog, once those scripts get done and everything is created, that's when you're going to go through this step here, and it's actually going to have you log in and scan your data sources. So here, let's go ahead and I will take a look at this in just a moment, but here's where you're going to select a source. In this case, you pick a blob storage and you're going to scan it, right? So that's actually, you're going to click the continue button, you're going to give it a name, and you're going to pick the blob storage account that it created for you and let it scan. And again, this is another part that takes a long time. So this probably adds another 10 minutes or so on your, or maybe 10 or 15 minutes to your time.
So Stacy, a quick question here. So these scripts are for, I guess, generating some sample data that you can use for scanning. But if you are, let's say, if you already have data assets, I guess you can actually skip that step, right? You can just go and start scanning, isn't it?
Yeah, if you have your own blob storage or you have your own data lake, then absolutely you can do that. You may still want to come in and go through this just to get the feel for the process, because unless you have carte blanche access to your organization, you may have to go to somebody else to get access to to be able to grant some of these permissions. Okay. So I would encourage you to actually run through it once just to get the lay of the land, so to speak. But you can see not very difficult here. You're going to scan the blob storage, you're going to scan the data lake, and then you're done. So that's going to be the first step here. So the scan data step. And so let's go out here though, and we're going to, the next step here, we're going to actually, in the second step, we're going to be registering or navigating and looking at the assets. We're going to browse and look at the lineage. In the next step after that, we're going to look at do a search. We're going to edit some entities, and then lastly, we're going to create some terms in the glossary and things of that nature. So let's go back over here to the tool. So this is the Purview Studio, and so I'm looking at here, and this is a very much a pattern that we're following with all of our new products here. We have a dashboard, if you will, where we can look at the Knowledge Center, and you get links to our help files and help on the products. You have the button here to register sources. You can browse assets or manage the glossary, but most of these items are already available in these hubs, if you will, along the left here, right? So the data catalog, the data map, the glossary, the insights, and the management piece. So you can see here, here's the data map. So here's where I've scanned the blob storage and the Azure Data Lake store. So if we can look at the results of that scan that I ran, let's look at the blob storage. So if I click on the view details, I can see I've scanned it once. There are 296 assets it pulled in, and it classified 78 of those assets. And the scan name, the blob scan was the name that I gave that scan. It talks about when it completed. The scan rule set that it actually executed was called Azure Storage, and so forth. And so we can see all the failed scans here. If we wanted to look at that, we can look at the individual scans here. If I want to click at the blob scan, and I can see when the scan duration. Actually, it took a little less time than I thought. So it looks like it was 5 minutes. So this one actually took a lot. Actually ran more quickly than I thought. So tells you the type of the scan, whether it's a full scan or not, scan type manual. You can schedule these as well. And again, it gives you some more information there. So if we go back to our sources, you can see you can also did one for the ADLS. So that was the Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. And if I want to look at this, I can go through and look at this one. It was also one scan, 195 assets. It classified at 56 of those assets, and tells me when it was registered, when it ran. Let's look at the actual time it ran. Looks like 6 minutes 23 seconds to run this scan. So again, maybe a little less time than I thought. So this is actually not too bad to run, to actually run through about 195 files out there in the data lake store. Okay. So if we want to go back though, we can look at the glossary, and we're going to go look at this in a minute, and the insights that you can see, you can see in my case, this gives me a bird's eye view of all the assets in there. So I've got a nice tree map visual. It looks like it came from Power BI, probably did. So Azure Blob Storage 66, 44 Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2, and then 2 in Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 1, right? So just some of the assets that are there. Now we can look at the scans and see some, when which ones succeeded, failed, or canceled. So we get a little bit of information on that and so forth. So we got a nice portal here for kind of going through and deriving some insights on what we're doing. But let's go ahead and start off. Let's go start off by looking at. I'm going to switch over here so I don't deviate off script here. Unintentionally, anyway. Okay, so we're going to go navigate now. We're going to go back to the data catalog. And in this one, we're going to, look at the home page here. You can see, here's, we talked already about some terminology here. Right here, we have a search, so we can search the catalog on your home page. We're going to be able to look at our search results so if we look for a search of financial, for instance, it's actually going to come back with everything it found in financial, right? So notice that contacts, labels, glossary terms along the left over here, it didn't find any of those because none of those have been defined for anything, and we're going to fix that in a minute. But of the asset type blob storage, it found 36, and it found 23 in Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2, right? So we can look at these search results, and we can pull up any one of these and look at more detail about what exactly that is. So the Contoso, financial statements here, it's an overview of it. There's no description for it. We can look at the properties over here for it. which are just giving me those Azure properties. Nothing too interesting here. But what is interesting is to look at the schema here, right? So we can see the column names, the email, we've got an email, a first name, a credit card. Notice how it picked up the classifications for me. It picked up that rule set and said, I recognize this as an email address, and that's because those rule sets that we created from Microsoft had regular expressions defined in them so that it could identify an email address. And so you can do the very same thing, right? And it actually picked up that this is a person's name as well, and a credit card number, and an IP address, and a personal ID, and it's likely a personal IP address. There is the possibility that it's going to erroneously pick something up and say it's an email address. And we would call that a false positive, right? And if you got too many of those, you can go in and turn off these rules and say, don't apply that one. It's just going to generate so much spam that it's worthless. It's more work for me to go and, unflag the ones that were actually email addresses because, they're really not. I just had a string with an @ sign in it or something like that, and it looked like an email address. But all of these things are here, and the lineage, we can look at the lineage as well. And so, we can do the, looking at the lineage here, I can see it came from Contoso financial statements in blob storage. It went through the Azure Data Factory copy activity. And if I click on that, you can see I can switch to the asset, or I can open it up in Azure Data Factory. Now, the other thing I can see is it ultimately wound up in Azure Data Lake Store Gen 2. And this is a pattern that you're going to see in most of these. In this particular demo, you're going to see that. But what's interesting here is that I'm able to flip over and see these, right? So if I actually go back to this and say switch to the asset, it will jump over to the blob storage, right? If I hit the back button and I go back and I say, I want to go back instead and look at the Azure Data Lake Store, I can do that as well. Should be able to do that. Okay, I must have bugged it out somewhere, so I must be hitting a preview bug already. But there should have been the ability to switch to that, and in most of these you're going to see that. So in this one we did. So if I switch to the asset in this case, or if I open it up in Azure Data Factory, it's going to open up Azure Data Factory and take me to the job that's been defined. So let me log in there. And so Azure Data Factory, if you're not familiar with it, is our ETL or ELT tool. It's all cloud native. It's got the notion of a pipeline here. So if I click on this copy data activity here in the pipeline activity, I can see, what the source data set was in blob storage. I can see that the destination set was in data lake storage over here. I can open these up and take a look at them and further work with it. So if I were an ETL developer, now I could start working with it and understand, where I need to make a change, for instance, right? So let's go back though. But if I switch over, excuse me, if I switch over to the asset here, I do get a lot of information that's directly within Purview, right? So if I'm looking at Purview, I can see a visual depiction of that process that I can get more granular detail in Azure Data Factory. So, even if I didn't have access to Azure Data Factory, which might be possible in your organization, I could go in here and still get some information on it that came in via the catalog scan, right? So that kind of gives you an idea of, what's going on here. So let's go back to the first here. Let's make sure I didn't skip anything. Ah, yes. Yeah, I should have showed you how to edit one. So let me make sure I go back to do one of those. Let's do one more look at some financial things. Let's go back into that financial statements. Now, what if I want to edit this data? So notice this in Purview. Let's pretend for a moment this is a very important table or source of data. It's in the data lake, and I want data scientists to gain benefit of it, and I want them to understand what's there, right? So I'm going to click the Edit button. And here I get a lot of different functionality. Like I can say this is the important financial statement. So I'm going to flag it, let my data scientists know this pertains to them. I can also set up classifications here, right? So if you click this block drop down, you can notice that we don't have a whole lot of. Let's make sure I didn't get it. Oh, it looks like I have a question. Let's say you need to update credentials. Does Purview allow Azure easily change user owner of a data source? Yeah, you can go in and there is a managed credential in here for the account that goes and does the scans. So yes, there is that ability to set that up, and this demo will set one of those up for you, but you can go out there and edit that as well. So it does allow you to get in here and change that. And so here, I can also set that data classification, or I can actually type one in if I don't have one, like, sensitive data, right? And it didn't find one. But in a moment, we're gonna show you how to edit those classifications and do that. But here are glossary terms too for more general tagging of items to say, this is automotive, this is, if I go down here and look at farm size, there may be nothing there. So I may want to put in finance, hit enter. Oops. Okay, it looks like it accidentally found one here. Actually, great. Okay, so it's not going to find one. So let's just pick business unit then. And if I click save, now it's going to save all that information into the catalog for me. So curious to know if it has fixed problem of resetting the credentials similar to other cloud data governance software I've seen, namely that small changes to user owner will require re-entering the password. To my knowledge, there's not Michael, there's not a issue with that, but if there is, then I would definitely, raise a ticket on it. But I would imagine even if there is, this being Purview, you'll probably see things like that, but I wouldn't think you would during GA. So, and by GA, I mean general availability, right? So if I go back. And so any questions on, what we've seen so far? Now there's one other, I probably missed it. So if I go on the contacts tab here, right? Notice I have no experts or owners here, but if I want to edit that and I want to say that, I recognize, hey, I'm a financial wizard or I'm an expert on that in the organization. So I'll start typing my Active Directory ID here. And I'll enter myself as an expert on it, right? Identify myself as an expert on this. So if somebody wants to understand how to use it, they may contact me. Now the expectation here is if I put myself as an owner as well, then maybe somebody who needs access to this data may need to come to me, and go through the organizational process for requesting access to the data, right? So that is definitely another thing that you can do there. So you can set up these, click save, And now when people discover this information, instead of just being clueless, not knowing where to go, and if they're a brand new company or brand new employee in the company, they can now understand where they need to go to get access to the kind of data that they need to perform their job, right? So lots of things here that we've seen in the catalog, and you're going to have, a lot of ability to get in here and edit and work with this. And any questions before we move on to the next set?
So Stacy, let's say we have on-prem data sources, we have cloud data sources, they're all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have to register these data sources? And when the scan runs, it takes care of cloud, on-prem. Do I have to define multiple scans? Do you know how?
Yes. Great question, Teo. So, and I forgot to show this when I was on this screen. So thank you for that lead in. So here is the register sources. And today, this is what we can connect to. So you can see we have Azure AWS, we have Azure Synapse Analytics, Amazon S3, Blob Storage, Cosmos DB, Data Explorer, Data Lake Gen 1 and 2. We have Azure dedicated SQL Pool, Azure Files, Azure SQL Database, and then Azure SQL Database Managed Instance, Hive Metastores, Oracle Databases, Power BI, SAP, ECC, SAP HANA, SQL Server, and Teradata. So those are our sources right now. But that is, if you are even familiar with our track record on products, we start rapidly adding these sources. So I would imagine this will grow very quickly in the organization. So, but to answer your question, Teo, you would have to do that here, right? And there is the ability to work with integration runtimes on here as well. So I'm not sure. I haven't seen the option on here, but there must be a way to go through to connect to storage locations on-prem, because I saw the integration runtime in here.
Yeah, that was going back to the question that was asked, does it require a gateway? Can it go through the ADF runtime, or it requires Power BI gateway? So
this is going to require an integration runtime to
okay.
access on-prem, not a Power BI gateway though.
Okay, is it the ADF? Do you know the one that we use for Azure Data Factory?
Yes, that integration runtime.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, if you go to, you can see that. I wasn't going to go through this, but we'll take a look here. So you can manage your integration runtimes here, and register those integration runtimes that you're going to be able to work with, and data factories, data shares, all of those type of on-premise data sources. This is where you would actually work with those. So if it were a SQL Server on-prem, I'm sure this works. I'm not quite sure how it works with the on-prem file stores, but I do know this. If you had an on-prem Oracle database or SQL database, you could set up the integration runtime like you would, most other Azure products, and work with it. And this is where you're going to also access the more advanced things I don't have a demo for today, like setting up your own scanning rule sets. You can see the scanning rule sets that are associated with each source type, and you can create your own and associate them with your own source types and so forth. So all that's really that little bit more advanced functionality you'll get to in here in the management hub. So let's go back here and make sure I'm not skipping. So if we want to go back to, if we want to browse assets though, you can actually just go into, your home blade here, and you can click browse assets. And if you want to go through the entire thing, you can just navigate through it, right? So here, if I want to look at the Data Lake Storage Gen 2, and I look at the starter one scan here, now I can see all these Azure Data Lake Storage accounts here. You can see the one that I changed the ownership on for myself here, that I show up as the owner on now. So yeah, but once you click through one of these, you're going to get to the same screen where we were at just a moment ago. That ability to do schema classifications, and so something I probably should have showed you, now that we create, actually, let's look up. Let's do a search on something a little more interesting here. And so when I typed a search for IP address, so let's say I'm looking for all the IP addresses regardless of where they are. It's going to tell me if IP address appears in the asset type name or anything like that, but it's also going to tell me if it's been tagged as under a classification system. So if I click that, check the mark that, then I can see all the ones where it actually, flags something with an IP address in it. So now if I go into this entity, now I should see over here in the schema, yes, over here is an IP address, right? And so there is a lot of functionality here, and the ability to work with data in search on all of those things that you saw on there now. So as soon as we create classifications and we create new categories, they're going to actually show up there for you to actually search on. So let's go back here. So let's look one of these up. Let's see, search for a completely different asset because I think we want to show deliver. There we go. So here is gross profit. And now if I want to look at one of these gross profit ones where I found gross profit, I can actually bring that up and look at that as well. So there you're going to see the hierarchy, where it came from, classifications, the description, so forth. All this stuff you can actually edit as well. Not sure why it's not doing that. That may be buggy too. This was working earlier. Okay. So if that works correct, maybe it's the one specific type I looked up, but I think we already looked at the lineage, and let's see one last. Yes. So now let's look at some resource sets. So we talked about how those are groups of files, and how during the scan, this is an interesting thing that's part of the scan process. So it's going to attempt to identify those resource sets I talked about. If you remember, that's where we have a bunch of files in a folder that all have the same different or have the same structure. And so it's going to recognize that using those regex expressions and looking at a sample of data and a number of files. And then when it sees a commonality, it's going to come up, identify them as a resource set. So let's go and let's find one of those resource sets. So we have positive cash flow, excuse me. And if I look at this and I look at, properties, let's see, let's look at the schema. Maybe I did not pick the correct one. Let me see. Yeah, I did find it as blob resource type here, but we should, here we are. So in this one, it found the partition count was 1. So it actually only found one file in this, but in most cases, you're going to see this pick up, say, more than one, right? So it should be something like 15 or so, right? And when that is higher, it's going to mean that it found like 15 different files with the that followed this same same structure of the file, right? Now, it might find slight variations, and if you see this number rise above 1, that means that one file had a slightly different format, right? So it may have had an extra column or lacked a column that one of them did, or so forth, right? So if you see this, that it will give you a number between 1 and 5. If it's more than 5, you'll see it just say 5 plus. That's probably a indicator that it actually is not really a resource set. So you may have gotten a false positive in that event and have to rescan that. But I haven't seen that happen yet, but I'm just told that could happen here. So look for that. I suppose it's more likely if you had hundreds of files out in a directory and you had a flexible schema format coming from a NoSQL source. So, but that's what the partition count is for. The partition count is going to tell you how many files that it found out there in the file system, and the schema count, how many different schemas that it found within that folder, right? So if you edit the schema, let's see, if you go to the schema and you want to look at a classification, like let's say you pick ID, and you want to click edit on this. And ID, it's not an ABA routing number or anything like that. It's a BK maybe. Let's see if that works correctly. Nope. Something is going wrong here today. Okay, so it's only going to let me pick from the list. Maybe it only does that on a classification screen. But here I can actually pick a different classification. I could pick an age of an individual. You can see I can pick multiple of these too if multiple do apply. So, pick all that apply here and all that you want. And I can actually give it a description. Say this is a unique primary key and hit save. I can also set the glossary terms and all that as well. So there you can see now I've classified it as an ABA routing number. So the next one, we're going to talk about how do you actually influence that glossary, right? So that the glossary of terms that you may want to use, things like status, whether it's a draft, approved, expired, most of these glossary terms have this. So let's go look at the glossary. So what I did here is I can actually create a new term here. So if I click new term, and I choose the system default as just a default template set that I'm going to use, and click continue. Here I can actually should be able to do it. Create one in here called financial, and I could, if there were a hierarchy, I could select a parent item here. I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to say this is financial information. And click create. And now, oh yeah, now I forgot this will actually allow me to set this now. So actually I just create a financial tag that I can now go back and use in the assets. Let's go back and look one up and just make sure. Okay, let's look up one that I did before. Sorry, I guess I got my demo out of order here a little bit, but if we go into edit now I should have this classification. So if I actually start typing in, oh, I'm sorry, wrong box here. Let's go get in the right box. There we go. So now I got financial, right? And I can save it. And so now if I go up here, I want to use my new term, financial, and we see that it shows up as a glossary term now, and I click that, and you can see now I'm down to the lone one that I just tagged, right? So as I go through this, and the idea is what I just did would be something you would probably want to do kind of sparingly, is manually apply these terms, but you can. And more likely you'll go through the rigor if you have a really, really large database of setting that up as a rule set so that it can automatically identify financial information and make that tag for you without you having to actually manually do it. Especially if you're going to you expect to see that in a lot of different places, right? So you would want it to behave like we just did to begin with, right? So, but if we go back to the glossary, you can see I was able to do a new term here, but what's probably more likely is you're going to use this import term, and to do a bulk insert, you might choose system default again, click continue. And here you can browse to a CSV file, all right? So when I first set this up, I clicked on browse. And when you download this Purview starter kit, if you navigate into the folder there, you're going to find this starter kit terms. You're going to click open on that, give that a little bit, about a minute, and it's going to load. And I would actually show you doing that, but there is a bug here right now where I was trying to delete all these, and it would not let me delete them all. So something strange about that just occurred. But that's the idea here, is you'll make these glossary terms, you'll utilize those classification values to flag data in a lot of different ways, right? You want to do, consider your goals, right? From a security perspective, how do you want to break down your security classifications, and how do you want to set those up to actually go through the rule sets and apply those? And not just the security classifications, though. It's not just for that. It's about information discovery too, right? So if I'm the new employee that comes in and I want to know where is the marketing data. When I was at UPS, we had thousands of relational databases, and it was just a monumental task for even people who've been there for a few years didn't have a great idea where all the data was, especially if they were in the business, right? So understanding who to go to, who to ask just to get access to the data they needed was a monumental task. And so this kind of tool really is imperative to actually do that. So you can manage your glossary terms here. You can create different sets of them for different purposes. And you can manage those all in this glossary terms screen here. So it's pretty simple. And again, your insights is for you to actually go in and actually understand more about your data. Look at the stats on it. This group's all about dashboards and reports. And I know Teo does an awesome job showing you all kinds of bling in Power BI. So this is something you're going to find interesting, to get the bird's eye view of, where, terms with assets and terms without assets. Did you create a bunch of terms that don't get used, right? And so, actually finding those right now, you can see in my case, I just uploaded a bunch of terms and I really haven't applied them anywhere, right? So, for the most part, unused, right? Incomplete terms, all of this stuff you can see, classification, insights. So I think there's going to be a lot more to this product. You're going to see a lot of growth in terms of the ability for it to, connect to more and more sources. We're going to try and make this not just a Microsoft product, but also an enterprise product that you work with all of your data sources in your organization. So think of it as your card catalog system to all of your information assets in your organization. That's all I had. I open the questions now as we wrap up. You don't have to drop them in the chat. You can come off of mute and just ask them, or whatever you prefer.
No?
Oh. No. Hey, Stacy, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, hey, it's a great presentation, and I really like where Microsoft going into. So I just have a couple of questions. Who are the biggest competitors for you in this space? Is it like a Collibra, Immuta, is there any metadata management, data lineage software?
The biggest competitors, it's really hard for me to say. I just don't. I think there are a lot of players out there. I honestly have not looked at a Forrester Wave or a Gartner Magic Quadrant on these. So, and this being such a new product for us, if people were really previously interested in this, they obviously went elsewhere. So I would imagine it must be Informatica probably, and IBM are probably up there with their products like Infosphere and IBM. I'm sure they have this capability. And then, Informatica, I know they have this type of thing built in as well.
Okay, and since it's being, I mean, when is this officially available or released for the use, general public?
Well, it's in public preview right now. Normally, that means that the products are very stable, but this being such a new product, I think it's going to be, a lot less stable than something like a new Power BI feature, which usually those things are pretty solid when they hit public preview. But this one, you're going to hit some bugs. I know I hit one, and then the other ones, I think were just me getting things out of order just a moment ago. But this one, I would not be surprised if you didn't see some bugs. And I would definitely expect a lot of new features by general availability. And I'm just not sure when our GA feature or when our GA date is on Purview. We may have published it. I just haven't looked into it yet.
Are there any certifications or anything available right now, or someone want to get onto this?
Oh, you can deploy and create one right now. When something's in public preview, you can do it. And usually the advantage to doing that is like was posted. I think someone posted here in the chat. We had a lower price, and some of it was free until a certain date. So normally during public previews, you'll get a discount, a pretty significant discount, sometimes like 50%. Sometimes it's free, depends on the nature of how much compute's under the hood for us at Microsoft. But you can stand one up and create one right now. I didn't do anything you couldn't do here.
All right, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Other questions? About Azure Purview or beyond?
So in the example, sorry, I have last question. In
Sure.
the beginning of the slides, you said there was some government, UK government, or somebody was trying to utilize this. So that means it already implemented this, or
Yeah, normally we go through a phase, and I'm not even sure what it's called first. But then the next phase is, and that's just purely Microsoft people working on the product. And then the second phase is called private preview. And when something's in private preview, then it's Microsoft by Microsoft invitation only, or maybe your account team manager will come to Microsoft and say, I've got a customer who wants to be an early adopter. The body of customers that gets in the private preview program gets to play with everything for free, and they get direct interaction with the product team on whether they like features or whether it has the features they need, and whether they work correctly or not. And those private preview organizations are what you're seeing on that slide there. So someone was in private preview, and they got in there and were willing to deal with the roadblocks and things that were probably broken and essentially be beta testers, right? So that private preview is then followed by public preview, and when it's in public preview, that's the moment when everybody gets the chance to get in there and play with it. Just there is a warning that there's no official guarantee from Microsoft that we won't break something. But usually that's, I haven't heard cases where we've actually, somebody's relied on something in public preview and then they, the product team wouldn't support them going into GA. So usually they're pretty good about that, about supporting you. But once it goes into GA, that's when everything's guaranteed, and when we have all the 24/7 help, and you can call in, to get access, around the clock.
Got it. Thanks.
Cool. Anybody else? Questions for Stacy? Well, I guess not. Stacy, that was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Teo. Appreciate it. It's always
Thanks
fun.
always for coming and sharing your expertise and knowledge. That's going to be, I guess, all for today. I'm going to see you guys. The next one again is July 5th, where we're going to talking about bookmarks and buttons, how to bring those to the next level in Power BI. So there is let me see if this was a question or not. If you are entertaining questions on Power BI, okay, how do we use URL query string to provide live data connections, inputs, parameters to SQL statements? How to use URL query string to provide live data connection inputs, parameters to SQL statements. So maybe Stacy, I can take this. So I think this is going to parameterizing, like for example, you have a store procedure and you need to pass parameters. So the user selects something on the report, like a slicer, and you want to pass this as a parameter to a store procedure. So this subject is near and dear to my heart because one of my clients wanted to do exactly this. They had a security framework implemented in Oracle, I believe it was, and everything was kind of store procedure driven, kind of the old security model. And they wanted to get this working, kind of pass the user identity from Power BI to all the way to that store procedure. So the short answer is right now we can't do that because the way Power BI is architected, there are two worlds, the Power Query world and the semantic model. So the semantic model, unfortunately, cannot pass parameters at runtime. Although there are DAX functions, for example, for user principal name that returns the interactive identity of the user, there is no way for you to pass this to the Power Query. With the exception, a few months ago, Microsoft introduced something called dynamic query parameters, which looked like a great fit, great solution. Unfortunately, it works only for what Microsoft calls managed data sources, cloud data sources like Google BigQuery, and there were a few more. I forgot the list, but it doesn't work for databases, which are where data typically comes from. So unfortunately, not very useful feature, very limited, because that dynamic query parameters would do exactly what I would say. Actually, will append the filter selection by the user to the query. So for example, if you're in direct query mode, you can get the whole thing to work. Fortunately, data sources are very limited at this point. Databases are not supported. Is that what you're asking? If I understood, Tarun, please feel free to unmute yourself. If I did not
I think George dropped a link in there about using a store procedure with, a parameter. I just think that when you publish that to the service, that's a little unwieldy to work with, but probably not what you're looking for. But yeah, it will work. You might want to talk about that. This
approach uses the query. You can define in Power BI. You can define something called query parameter. So I can say, for example, the server name or the database name could be parameterized. The problem is that you cannot change it at a runtime. So for example, if I want to bind this to a slicer selection, filter selection, or anything else that DAX knows about it, fortunately, I can't do it. So the way this feature works right now, and it's more useful for changing kind of connection strings. For example, you have a development environment, have a production environment, is to deploy your report. So define the query parameter, add that query parameter to the Power Query, whatever it needs to go, like server or the database name, publish the report, and then statically go to the dataset properties and explicitly change that parameter to whatever value you want. So this is the context of the change. You have to manually go and change it. There is no dynamic passing if this is dynamic kind of binding things to happen at runtime. Yeah, so all of these links that the community posted is about this query parameter features. Unfortunately, I think the question was about how to pass that all the way to the data source, like a store procedure or a query statement. And that's where the things are kind of breaking apart. Want to answer?
Yes, yes, I think you interpreted my question correctly. I was looking at end-to-end versus just specifying the query parameters, and then passing those to stored procedure. There's ample documentation on that piece, the backend, but then kind of orchestrating end-to-end is the challenge.
Right.
Yeah, I think the one everybody wants to see is they want to have this drop-down combo on their report and pick a start date and an end date or whatever that way, and that all gets sent off to a stored procedure and it gets executed, and then only that data comes back to Power BI. Mm-hmm. And so that's the disconnect right there. Is
yes, that's a big ask.
So if you work for larger corporations, these organizations have a lot of influence to Microsoft, right? And Stacy also can probably help with this. But my advice to you will be go and knock on the door. Tell them that this feature is very important because I'm hearing from my clients as well. They need something like this, especially with the importance, kind of the direction the technology is going more toward direct query instead of caching data. That will become even more and more important, right? You want to pass the user identity, you want to pass the user selection. So please knock on the door and tell them we want that dynamic query feature that we have right now, dynamic query parameters, to be extended to what we call native data sources. Native data sources means that Microsoft just did a wrapper on top of the native provider, like for SQL Server or Oracle on top of that. So we want this for relational database. We want this for native data sources. And who knows, maybe we're going to get it.
Yeah, and the way to kind of knock on the door, so to speak, from Teo, if I may, I dropped in the ideas.powerbi.com. If you go in there and you look for an idea, and if there's an idea there that matches what you want, vote on it. And if there's not, put one in there and then turn around to Microsoft and say, here's the idea number, and they start passing that around internally at Microsoft. And especially if you're, a bigger company with a lot of influence, once they get enough people asking for the same thing, that's when they really start to pay attention and start to deliver those features or target those features. That's the way they prioritize things, that they put into Power BI.
Yep. You'll be surprised how big of an influence you may have if you're Fortune,
yeah.
Fortune, whatever company. But that's it. Any other questions, guys? Purview or Power BI related? Anything else? Well, I guess great. I mean, it's been, I guess, a long day, I guess, for all of us. So thank you so much for attending. I'm going to pause some. I think there was a question about the recording. Recordings goes into, let me just go and send that URL again. But it's the...
Thanks, I appreciate it.
No problem at all. Thanks for attending. I'm just putting the link to recordings. Just give me an hour or so for that to render. And I'm going to, you'll find it on YouTube on this URL that I just posted. All right. Well, all the best until July 5th. Have a great time. Stay safe. Bye.